how to escape North Korea. North Korea is an elusive country unlike any other, and while a lot of what happens in North Korea is a secret, the cruelty, poverty, and human rights violations are definitely not hidden. North Korea is globally known for its poor treatment of its people and tyrannical dictator. However, the world seemingly just allows it, and that is a topic for a different discussion. But I mention this all to say that North Korea is not a good place, and for that reason it's unsurprising that every single day people try to escape this country. Those people are known as defectors. The record of North Korean defectors goes all the way back to 1998, with a recorded count of 947 people escaping the country. From 1998 all the way up until 2011, we saw a rise in the amount of people that were able to escape, with a peak number of defectors of 2,914 in 2009. But after 2011, the number started to float around 1,500 and shrank all the way down to around 1,000 defectors in 2019. However, after 2019, the amount of people that were able to successfully escape plummeted. The reason for such a dramatic drop in escapees is North Korea enacted a shoot-on-sight order that essentially gave all Border Patrol the authority to shoot any person in the buffer zone surrounding North Korea who was there without permission. Escaping North Korea is scary and truly deadly, especially now more than ever. But for some living in North Korea, that risk is worth taking, and they'd rather die on the pursuit of freedom than living under the control of a dictator. Since 1998, there have been over 34,000 people in total who have been able to escape North Korea successfully. And today, I'm going to discuss some of the craziest ways that these people accomplished such a feat, starting tame and getting crazier as the list goes on. Leveraging wealth and social class. You are a high-ranking government official, specifically working with state-run businesses. You are one of the extremely rare, wealthy North Koreans, at least relatively, and you experience privileges many North Koreans could never dream of. Not only do you have a comfortable dwelling and consistent access to quality food and clean water, but you also have access to something that almost resembles freedom. You work tireless days, and sometimes even nights, and you are quite literally being worked to the bone. However, every day on your commute, you realize how grateful you are to be in the position you're in. And while you are grateful for your position, you understand that even the best position in North Korea still isn't all that great. And for some time, while on business, specifically in mainland China, you've seen the difference in quality of life, and you've been slowly taking notes on how you could potentially leave your job. Your job grants you a lot of authority, and you are well connected not only with the North Korean government, but with government officials and high-ranking businessmen in China. One night, while drinking at a bar in mainland China, half asleep, a man sits beside you. He doesn't say anything, but he hands you his card. You tell this man that you're not on business hours and you appreciate it, but you're just looking to relax. And the man sternly looks you in the eyes and says, "I know you're North Korean, and if you ever want to start a new life, you call this number." This moment was sobering, as this man wasn't speaking to you in Mandarin. He was speaking fluent Korean. And before you could even ask another question, he got up and left. You wake up the following morning, early, hungover in this Chinese hotel. You briefly remember that crazy dream you had last night until you reach into your pocket and feel that you actually got that card and that wasn't a dream. You get in a taxi and make your way back to the airport. And on your way back to North Korea, the only thing you could think of is the offer this man gave you. You assume he had to be a defector, as no mainland Chinese person would speak such perfect Korean, specifically with a North Korean accent. And nobody would recognize the fact that you were North Korean or make you such a preposterous offer unless they were sure, likely because they were in a similar situation. You get home and you're happy to see your family. And after putting your children to bed and once again going to bed late, you sit beside your wife in bed and tell her a secret. You tell her that you met somebody in China and this person could change their lives. You explain to your wife who you met and what they offered, and you notice that your wife doesn't look enthusiastic. She looks shocked. And before you could ask your wife what she thought about the possibility of potentially starting a new life and leaving North Korea, she jumps out of bed and begins screaming. She is completely repulsed by the idea that you could potentially ever want to leave the greatest nation. And she's convinced that you must be brainwashed and that you must be reported to the government immediately. Your wife is either brainwashed or simply terrified of what could happen to her if her husband was testing her loyalty to North Korea, or if anybody happened to be listening. Regardless, your wife grabs the phone and immediately starts dialing. You grab the phone and tell her that you were kidding. You were only simply testing her because nobody loved North Korea more than you, and you wanted to test your wife's loyalty to North Korea to make sure your marriage was strong. This seems to calm your wife and you both go to bed. And it's at that moment when you realize that if you were to leave North Korea, you're doing it alone. Your next trip to mainland China isn't for another 6 months, but the following day at work, you convince your boss us that you have unfinished business in China, and it's best for the company if you return as soon as possible. The following week, the opportunity arises, and you're back in China. You take out the card and you give it a call. You meet the man at the same bar that you're at. After your first night in China, you call the number on the card that you were given, and you're met with an automated voice message saying coordinates and a cash value. You assume that the coordinates are where you're supposed to meet someone, and you assume that cash value is the fee required for your freedom. You meet up with this man once again, and over the course of the week you're supposed to be doing business, you get a fake Korean passport, and you are given a dedicated travel guide, aka your new wife, whose sole job is to get you to the airport safely and make sure that you are able to catch a flight from mainland China to South Korea. This isn't the woman's first rodeo, and she's able to get you through security checkpoints and past suspicious Chinese government officials, as her Chinese is perfect and her story for why she is hanging out with a South Korean man checks out. You get dropped off at the airport by this mysterious woman, and when she drops you off at the airport, she says, "Never come back." You board your flight to South Korea, and your new life has begun. So yeah, this is obviously a hypothetical story, but it's an example of exactly how someone could use their wealth, connections, and status to escape North Korea. This method of escape is the most effective, the safest, and also the least common, because privileged individuals in North Korea simply are hard to come by. And the percentage of those that would even consider leaving or betraying North Korea is even smaller. However, it has been done, and it needed to be mentioned. In this story I just told, I outlined a mysterious man, and this man represents a very real person and industry that exists, known as escape brokers. And their entire business model is essentially smuggling people out of North Korea, obviously for a hefty fine. However, if you're a wealthy individual, then that is a small price to pay for your freedom and for your safety, because the other methods of escape we're going to be discussing are not nearly as plush as this. The reason why this mysterious woman, who was an employee of this smuggling company, gave you a South Korean passport was, one, because it was a perfect excuse of why somebody in China would be speaking Korean, and secondly, because it raised no red flags of why a South Korean would be going to South Korea from China. If this man decided to fly from mainland China to South Korea with a North Korean passport, it is highly likely that the Chinese government would be extremely suspect of this and you would be questioned. Specifically because China has very close relations with North Korea, and also has a treaty in place where any escapees from North Korea that make it to China will be returned to North Korea by the Chinese government. So yeah, even if you are able to simply escape to China from North Korea by any means, you're definitely not free, but that's something we'll discuss later. The example I gave in the beginning focuses on businessmen or government officials who are able to essentially network with influential and powerful people and also have access to money. But there are other ways you can leverage class and status to escape, notably being high-level athletes or privileged students from these rich families who are able to both work and study abroad. In these cases, when you are out of North Korea, you can simply just not go home. And depending on where you are abroad, you can be protected, and in some cases even given citizenship as a refugee, allowing you to start a brand new life. One more thing I want to mention is the fact that in the story I gave, this character had kids. And if you're familiar with North Korean law, then you know that the North Korean government likes to punish not only you, but also your family for your crimes. And in the instance of the story I gave initially, the reason why the man was so able to confidently leave North Korea is because he used a high-level escapee broker. And one of his services that they include in their price is faking your death. So instead of being seen as an escapee by the North Korean government, this mysterious man was able to make it look like you died doing business abroad. And for that reason, your family is spared. And while this entire situation is hypothetical, the core of these conditions is based in reality. And while this man's family was spared in this instance, that is not always the case. One of the reasons this man was even allowed to travel internationally for business is because he had a family. And to the North Korean government, that is something that they see as collateral. Because if this man has a wife and kids, he is much less likely to just defect. Because the man knows that if he defects, his family will be tortured and killed on his behalf. And for most, that is reason enough to stay. Regardless, let's move on. Okay, now this might be a bit off topic, but if you're anything like me, then you've had somebody tell you, hey, go f yourself. And with today's video sponsor, Adam and Eve, you actually can. Adam and Eve is the adult toy company, offering a wide variety of toys to use either by yourself or with a partner. And their product range is vast and quality. In 2025, they are celebrating over 50 years in business. And that's simply because they're the best in the game when it comes to adult toys. Adam and Eve offers 24/7 customer service, 90-day no-hassle returns, and most importantly, discreet shipping. If you're interested in a little bit of self-love or just wanting to spice spice things up with your partner? Go to adamandeve.com today and use code TMB to get 50% off your first item plus free shipping in the US and Canada plus free rush processing. Some exclusions apply. Thank you, Adam and Eve, for sponsoring this video and helping everyone love themselves a little bit more. International labor camps. You're a skinny, single, young man living in the northern part of North Korea. You're an orphan and you work on a farm. You've been working at this farm for as long as you can remember, and the people that live at this farm are the closest thing you have to family. But as you get older, it seems the worse the treatment gets, and it seems that the more work you put in, the less that you get paid. You're a full-grown man now, but the meals you get served are still the portion size you got when you were a child. And at this point, you're almost skin and bones. You've tried begging and pleading with the owners of this farm for more food, as they are the only ones providing your meals. However, they're not budging. They tell you should be grateful for what you get. And while they're not in any better of a situation, you realize that if you stay here, you're going to die. So one night, you plan your escape. Not from North Korea, but just from this farm. Under the veil of night, you escape on a dirt road with a burlap sack on your back and the rags that you've had for your entire life. You find yourself in a small village and soon realize that your money did not go nearly as far as you thought it would. So to conserve money, you decide to steal. And while it isn't like you at all, it's life or death, and you're able to justify it. And you fill your bag with food from a stand in the city square, from the village farmer's market. Before you could even close your bag, you feel two hands on your shoulder and turn around. It's a police officer. And good news, you'll have a place to sleep tonight. Bad news, you're going to jail. You're brought into jail, booked, and because of your retaliation, the punishment that you're given is 2 years in a labor camp in Russia. After 2 cruel weeks in a holding cell, you're put on a train and sent to northern Russia, where you're going to be spending the next 2 years on a lumber mill. You arrive at this mill and realize that this camp is almost fully employed by North Korean criminals, which gives you some relief as you at least have somebody to talk to, because you were expecting Russians. And while all of the guards are heavily armed Russians, those are really the only Russians around you, as this labor camp is in an extremely remote area. On your first night in the camp, you speak to one of the other North Koreans, and he tells you that you came at the perfect time, and that him and the other men at this labor camp have been planning an escape for years. And tomorrow night was the night that they leave, and that if you were brave enough, you could come with. You had no intentions of leaving North Korea and ended up in Russia by accident, but at this point, you had nothing to lose. The cold weather was unbearable, you can't stand farm work anymore, and even dying at this point sounds better than working in a Russian labor camp. You tell the man you're in, and he says, "We'll wake you up tomorrow night." You work the next day and go to bed the next night, and like he said, in the middle of the night, this man wakes you up quietly. Similar to something you did yourself not long ago, under the veil of night, you and a small group of these North Korean prisoners set off in the middle of the night. Leaving the labor camp wasn't the hard part, as security was relatively low due to the location of this labor camp and the assumption that if anybody were to leave, they would be dead within days, as the closest civilization was multiple days away on foot. And all of these cities had police that specifically do checks for North Koreans. Walking through this frozen, barren wasteland, you ask this man, "What is the plan? Where are we going? If Russian police find us, we will be sent back to North Korea. They are allies." And that's when this man reveals his master plan. Some of the criminals you are with have been in this prison for so long that they speak fluent Russian. And because of the Russian that this prisoner picked up, in the months of listening to guards, they were essentially able to map out not only where the train tracks are, but the train schedule as well. After hours of walking in the darkness, day begins to break, and you notice that your group is already smaller. 2 of the men that were in your group initially were no longer, and it's mutually assumed that they fell behind and froze to death. You and your remaining men find the train tracks, wait for the next train taking wood out of the labor camp, hop on one of the very last carts, and you are now, once again, on your way to freedom. Wow. In this hypothetical, you're in a similar situation as the first person, but obviously on a much different scale. Because you didn't even intentionally go abroad, you were just sent abroad by the government, and you had no expectations of fleeing at all. You simply accepted your fate, but you were at the right place at the right time. And fortunately, the people that you trusted had the perfect plan. Did the person in this hypothetical have ridiculous plot armor? Of course. But I figured in these fictional scenarios, obviously based on reality, it would make sense to have them at least escape at the end of the story. Because if all the stories ended with, "and they were caught and killed," well, it's not really a good example of how to escape. It's how you could try to escape and then die, which is the unfortunate reality for most. But yeah, labor camps exist, and obviously they exist all over North Korea, but some of them are abroad, and they are primarily in Russia. And while nobody wants to be at a Russian labor camp, there are North Koreans who see going to a Russian labor camp as a golden opportunity to escape their country. And it's for that reason that the North Korean government is very stingy on who they send abroad. And in most cases, you're not going to be sent to an abroad labor camp. And the only reason why you in this story were even sent abroad is because you have farm experience, you've worked in cold conditions before because you lived in a northern part of North Korea, and according to your documents, you still had a living family, which is a requirement to be sent abroad. And obviously you were an orphan since birth and don't know any of your family. Legally speaking, you still had a living family, so the government assumed you had loyalty to them, which made you a much lower escapee risk. Of course, getting to Russia is similar to getting to China. You are not necessarily fully free in these countries. You're more free, but these are still countries that have close ties to North Korea. And you are at risk for being caught and being deported back to North Korea, where you'll be punished severely. And in this instance, you and the other criminals who made it to this train were taking a train that took you out of Russia and into Europe, as Europe has no allegiance to North Korea, much like the rest of the Western world. And if you're able to make it through Russia into a European country, and from there find a South Korean embassy, at that point, it's safe to say you're safe and are going to win yourself a one-way ticket to South Korea. The reason why South Korea is so desirable for North Koreans is because South Korea gives automatic citizenships to North Korean escapees, and at least the government accepts these people with open arms. Socially, there is definitely polarity on how people treat defectors, but a bit of scrutiny for being North Korean is definitely better than living in North Korea. So at this point, let's reconsider. Obviously, going north isn't ideal, because if you use the small border that borders North Korea and Russia, not only is it extremely well guarded, cold, and far from any sort of safe haven, it's only really a good option for those looking to get into a labor camp, as being sent to a labor camp allows you to cross the border safely. And now we also understand that going through China, another country that borders North Korea, is also not ideal, because that border, once again, is highly guarded. And because of the connection that China has with North Korea, you're essentially still in North Korea until you're out of China, which means that you have a long ways to travel before you can really take a breath and relax. But that leaves the natural question. What about the last country that borders North Korea? Why not escape to the country that everybody wants to go, that gives you immediate asylum and citizenship? South Korea is literally connected to North Korea. It's not freezing cold. It's a country that will accept you. And this country also has people that speak the same language as you. It seems like the perfect way to escape. And while on paper, you're definitely right, there's one major issue. You're not the only person that understands this. The North Korean government understands this quite dearly. And that's why there's a demilitarized zone that stretches the entire land border of North Korea and South Korea. And while that name seems semi-safe, it's extremely deceptive, as this border is not demilitarized at all. It is very militarized. There is so much military from both North and South Korea. There is literally hundreds of thousands of soldiers on either side of this border. And in the area in between these two countries, there is active landmines, electric fences, and watchtowers with the executive order to shoot on sight. So let's get into our third and final story to outline likely the craziest and deadliest way you could escape North Korea. Escaping by land as a regular North Korean citizen. You, like many other North Koreans, are simply sick and tired of being sick and tired, and you decide you're gonna make a run for it. You live near a remote part of the border, where there are active personnel, but it's not as heavily monitored as other places. You pack a bag and set out on foot, feeling confident that you can make this land crossing. You don't see anybody, and you figure this is gonna be a walk in the park. And after hours of walking, you realize that you don't even exactly know where the border is, and for all you know, you might already be in South Korea. You walk further and further, and finally begin to feel free. You must have at this point passed the border, until you see something in the distance. You walk closer to it and you realize that it's a sign that says active minefield. And it's at this point that you realize that you are much further from the border than you thought, and you have a long ways to go. You call the sign's bluff and continue walking. And after taking a few steps and walking for 5, 10, 15, 30 minutes, you knew there was no mines and continue walking. And you're right, there was no mines, but there was snipers. Snipers that you didn't see, but they saw you. And before you can even blink, you hear a gunshot and everything goes black. Unfortunately, that is a reality for people trying to cross the land border between North and South Korea. Crossing over the water as a regular North Korean citizen You're a young woman fed up with living in North Korea. You've been abused your whole life, and at this point, you feel that anything is better than your current existence. You've studied geography in school and understand that the waters on the west coast of North Korea where you live are much more favorable than the east coast for fishermen. But if fishermen favor it, must be a reason, and the waters must be calmer, which must mean it's easier to escape. One night you head down to a local dock and brazenly steal a boat. You simply head south and plan on running into the South Korean Coast Guard. Although hours into your trip on this boat, you get caught up in a storm and you lose your motor. At this point, you're stranded at sea at the mercy of the ocean. There's essentially 3 outcomes that are possible, and I'll just go through them quickly. Option 1, you wash up on shore. You think you're in South Korea, but you're actually still in North Korea, and you're killed. The tide takes you north and you wash up on shore in China, where you are found by police, deported to North Korea, and killed. Or, if you are extremely fortunate, you do wash up on shore in South Korea and begin a new life. Or option 4, you lose your life at sea, either due to harsh conditions or by being caught by the North Korean Navy, which heavily patrol these waters because of people like yourself, escaping via the land border as military personnel. The story I'm about to tell is not a fictional hypothetical like the others. The story I'm about to tell is a real story about a real individual, and is likely one of the craziest known escape stories from North Korea into South Korea. Chong-Song was a high-ranking military official in North Korea who was also an industrial engineer. He had a good job and was considered good at that job, but obviously he wasn't satisfied. And one day, he met his breaking point and was willing to risk his life for his freedom. On the morning of November 13th, 2017, Sung stole a military jeep from the military base where he worked, heading directly for the demilitarized zone, the area between North and South Korea, aiming to get into South Korea and begin a new life, in a way that is regarded as likely the most dangerous way. Although Sung did have an advantage, being military personnel, he was able to be very close to the border. He had security access and a relatively comprehensive knowledge of how things worked. Although, even with all of the knowledge in the world, you need luck and likely God on your side to even make this possible. And on this morning, Sung definitely had both. Sung sped this military jeep directly at the border, crashing through fences and driving right through no man's land. And while approaching freedom and seemingly having a perfect escape, his car lost a wheel. He hit a ditch on the side of the road and was immobile, and had to continue his escape on foot. Sung was close to the border, but he did have North Korean officials tailing him closely, and they were shooting to kill. Sung officially crossed the border, although with 5 bullet holes in his body, and was able to crawl behind a small barrier where he collapsed and stayed seemingly lifeless for hours. Later that day, the South Korean military conducted a rescue operation and strategically transported him via air to a hospital and saved his life. In the hospital, it was discovered that he was shot 5 times and lost over half of his blood, and that if he did not receive this emergency surgery, he would have died there. Sung's story is extremely well documented, and this entire situation was actually caught on camera due to the sheer amount of surveillance on the North and South Korean border. And Sung is definitely one of the luckiest people to ever cross the North Korean border illegally. If you are living in North Korea currently, well, truthfully, you're not watching this video. But if you're curious about how people have successfully and unsuccessfully escaped North Korea in the past, hopefully this video gave you a bit of context, and did so in a way that was entertaining due to the hypothetical stories that I basically just made up, but obviously based on reality for the most part. If you want more storytelling videos, let me know in the comments below. I try to read as many comments as possible. If you haven't got your fill of Trust Me Bro content yet, check out this video on screen. I guarantee you're gonna love it. And if you loved this video, please consider subscribing. Right now, we are on the road to 1 million subscribers. And we also just recently hit 500K, so thank you guys so much for that. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. And as always, trust me, bro.